The lab technician's hands trembled as she rechecked the DNA results for the third time. What she was seeing couldn't be right. It would destroy everything Detective Rick Peterson had believed about his life. All four of his children shared. No genetic material with him, but they all matched his neighbor, James Cooper. By the time anyone understood the implications of these results, it would already be too late. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. On October 12, 2019, Detective Rick Peterson walked through the doors of the Chicago Police Department's 23rd Precinct. The 45-year-old veteran detective had built a reputation for solving complex cases with meticulous attention to detail. Today seemed like any other day, coffee in hand, case files under his arm, a quick nod to the desk sergeant. Rick's home life appeared equally stable. He lived in Oak Grove, a quiet suburb where manicured lawns and white picket fences created the illusion of perfection. Michelle, his wife of 18 years, managed their household, while their four children, Brandon 16, Sophia 14, Tyler 11, and Emma 7, filled their home with constant activity. Their neighbor, James Cooper, had moved in next door a decade ago. A successful real estate agent with a charming demeanor, James lived with his wife Sarah and their two children. The families often gathered for barbecues, sharing stories over grilled burgers while their children played in adjoining yards. That morning, Rick stopped by the department's new forensics lab. The Chicago PD had recently implemented mandatory DNA collection for all officers working cold cases, a policy designed to prevent contamination and assist with familial matching in unsolved crimes. "Just need to swab your cheek, detective," said Dr. Sarah Hoffman, the lead forensic analyst. "Standard procedure." Rick compiled without hesitation, making small talk about his latest case. He had no reason to suspect this routine test would shatter his entire world. 2 weeks passed uneventfully. Rick closed a high-profile robbery case, Brandon won his debate tournament, and Sophia earned straight A's on her report card. Life continued its predictable rhythm until that fateful afternoon, when Rick received an urgent summons to Captain Williams's office. The captain's face was grim as Rick entered. Dr. Hoffman sat beside him, clutching a manila envelope. "Rick, there's something we need to discuss about your DNA test," Captain Williams began, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. Dr. Hoffman opened the envelope, spreading documents across the desk. "Detective Peterson, when we processed your sample through our familial matching system, we discovered some unexpected results." Rick's confusion grew as he studied their somber expressions. "What kind of results?" "Your DNA doesn't match any of your children," Dr. Hoffman said softly. "Not Brandon, not Sophia, not Tyler, and not Emma." The words hung in the air like toxic smoke. Rick felt the room tilt as his mind struggled to process the impossible. "There must be a mistake," he insisted. "Run the test again." "We did," Dr. Hoffman replied. "Multiple times. The results are conclusive." Captain Williams cleared his throat. "There's more, Rick. The children's DNA matches someone else in our system. Your neighbor, James Cooper." The revelation struck Rick like a physical blow. Memories flooded his consciousness. James offering to babysit when Rick worked late, the way Brandon's laugh echoed James's, Emma's dimples that perfectly mirrored their neighbors. "All four of them," Rick whispered, his voice breaking. Dr. Hoffman nodded. "The probability of paternity is 99.99% for each child." Rick stumbled from the office, ignoring concerned calls from colleagues. He drove home in a fog, his detective's mind automatically cataloguing details he'd previously overlooked. The timing of each pregnancy, Michelle's mysterious girls' weekends when he was on overnight stakeouts, James's overly familiar manner with his children. Michelle's car sat in the driveway. Rick found her in the kitchen, humming, while she prepared lunch for Emma, who was homesick from school. "Michelle," he said, his voice eerily calm, "we need to talk. She turned, immediately sensing the tension radiating from him. "Rick, what's wrong?" "Send Emma to her room." His tone brooked no argument. Once Emma was safely upstairs, Rick slammed the manila envelope on the counter. "Explain this." Michelle's hands shook as she read the documents. The clinical language of DNA analysis, the percentage matches, the undeniable proof of her betrayal. Each page deepened her visible distress. "Rick, she stammered, tears forming in her eyes. "I can explain." "Explain how our neighbor fathered all 4 of my children?" His voice rose with each word. "How long, Michelle? How long?" The truth emerged between sobs. The affair began shortly after they moved to Oak Grove, during a rough patch in their marriage. Rick's demanding schedule left Michelle feeling isolated, especially with infant Brandon requiring constant attention. James offered friendship that evolved into something more. "It wasn't continuous," Michelle pleaded. "It happened on and off over the years. I tried to end it so many times." "All 4 of them," Rick repeated, his voice hollow. "Every child I've raised, loved, sacrificed for, none of them are mine." "They are yours," Michelle cried. "You're their father in every way that matters." "Don't you dare," Rick roared, sweeping dishes from the counter. They shattered against the tile floor, causing Emma to call fearfully from upstairs. The sound of his daughter's voice seemed to break something in Rick. He slumped against the wall, sliding to the floor among the broken dishes. "How could you do this to me, to us?" Michelle knelt beside him, reaching out tentatively. "I never meant for any of this to happen. I love you. I've always loved you." He recoiled from her touch. "Love? You call this love?" The front door opened, bringing Brandon, Sophia, and Tyler home from school. They froze at the scene, their father on the floor, their mother crying, shattered dishes scattered across the kitchen. "Dad, Mom, what's going on?" Sophia asked, her voice trembling. Rick looked at his children. No, not his children, and felt his heart fracture again. How could he tell them their entire family was built on a lie? "Go to your rooms," he ordered. "All of you." He gathered his badge, service weapon, and car keys. Michelle watched in panic as he headed for the door. "Where are you going?" "Away from here. Away from you." "Rick, please, think about the kids." "The kids?" He laughed bitterly. "You mean James's kids?" He drove aimlessly for hours, eventually checking into a seedy motel under a false name. Sitting on the edge of the bed, he stared at his service weapon, his entire identity unraveling. Who was he if not a husband and father? Meanwhile, Brandon had overheard fragments of the conversation from upstairs. Though he didn't understand everything, he knew something terrible had happened involving Mr. Cooper. His world, too, was beginning to crumble. The Peterson household attempted normalcy at dinner, but the empty chair at the head of the table dominated the room. When Emma asked about her father, Michelle's weak excuse about working late fooled no one. Brandon couldn't contain his anger any longer. "Stop lying, Mum. We're not stupid." Michelle's fork clattered against her plate. "Brandon, I heard you and Mr. Cooper talking yesterday," he continued, his voice cold. "I know what you did." Sophia and Tyler exchanged confused glances while Emma's lower lip quivered. Michelle felt the walls closing in as her oldest son's accusation hung in the air. "This is an adult matter, Brandon. We'll discuss it later." Brandon stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Will we? Like you discussed it with Dad for 16 years? The teenager stormed out, slamming the front door behind him. Michelle buried her face in her hands as Emma began to cry. Sophia and Tyler sat frozen, sensing their family was disintegrating, but not understanding why. Next door, James Cooper had been monitoring the Peterson house anxiously all day. He'd witnessed Rick's early return, followed by his enraged departure. When Brandon burst from the house, James felt compelled to intervene. "Brandon, wait," he called, jogging across the lawn. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Brandon whirled around, his face contorted with anger. "Stay away from me." "I know you're upset, but upset," Brandon laughed bitterly. "You destroyed my family. You're not my father, no matter what some DNA test says." James reached out, but Brandon shoved him hard. "Don't touch me. I hate you. I hate all of you." The commotion brought Sarah Cooper to the door. She observed her husband with growing confusion. "James, what's going on?" Brandon turned to her, his eyes blazing. "Ask your husband about his affair with my mom. Ask him about fathering all four of us." Sarah's face drained of color as she stared at James. "What is he talking about?" James couldn't meet her eyes. "Sarah, we need to talk." "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, backing away. "Is that true?" The sound of screeching tires interrupted the confrontation. Rick's car pulled into the driveway, and he emerged with a determined look on his face. In his hand was his service weapon. "Rick, what are you doing?" Michelle cried from the doorway, Emma clinging to her leg. Rick ignored her, advancing on James. "You took everything from me," he said, his voice deadly calm. "My wife, my children, my entire life was a lie because of you." James raised his hands, defensively. "Rick, let's talk about this rationally. I know you're hurting, but—" "Hurting?" Rick laughed maniacally. "You have no idea what I'm feeling right now." Sarah had retreated inside and was frantically dialing 911. Brandon stood frozen, watching the scene unfold with horror. Michelle tried to move toward Rick, but he pointed the gun at her. "Stay back," he warned. "All of you, stay back." "Dad, please." Sophia called from the upstairs window, tears streaming down her face. "Don't do this!" Rick's resolve wavered for a moment as he looked up at Sophia. But then his gaze hardened again as he turned back to James. "Why?" he demanded. "Why did you do it? Was it just about sex? Did you enjoy making a fool of me?" James swallowed hard. "It wasn't like that, Rick. Michelle and I... It just happened. We never meant to hurt anyone." "Just happened?" Rick's finger tightened on the trigger. 16 years of lies just happened? The sound of approaching sirens filled the air. Michelle made another attempt to reach Rick. "Please, Rick, think about the children. They need you." "They're not my children," Rick screamed, his composure finally breaking. "They never were." In that moment of distraction, James made a desperate lunge for the gun. They grappled, the weapon waving wildly as they fought for control. Michelle screamed, pulling Emma back into the house. Brandon stood paralyzed, unable to move as he watched his father, the only father he'd ever known, fight with the man who was biologically responsible for his existence. The gun went off. James crumpled to the ground, clutching his shoulder. Blood seeped through his fingers as Sarah screamed from the doorway. Rick stood frozen, the weapon still pointed at James's fallen form. "Drop the weapon!" The commanding voice belonged to Officer Rodriguez, Rick's longtime partner. Multiple police. Cars screeched to a halt, officers taking defensive positions behind their vehicles. Rick turned slowly, his face a mask of anguish. "Mike, you don't understand what he did." "I know about the DNA tests," Rodriguez said, his weapon trained on his friend. "The whole department knows. But this isn't the way, Rick. Think about Brandon and the others watching right now." Rick glanced up at the house, where 4 terrified faces peered from various windows. Emma was sobbing into Michelle's chest, while Sophia held Tyler protectively. Brandon remained on the front lawn, tears streaming down his face. "They're all I've ever cared about," Rick whispered, the fight draining from his body. "And now I find out they were never mine." The gun clattered to the ground, and within seconds officers surrounded Rick. They cuffed him gently, respecting their fellow detective even as they arrested him. James was rushed to the hospital, his wounds serious but not life-threatening. That night, Michelle sat with her children in the living room, trying to explain the unexplainable. Brandon had already pieced together most of the story, but his younger Siblings struggled to comprehend the magnitude of what had happened. "Your father found out something today that hurt him very deeply," Michelle began, choosing her words carefully. "He learned that Mr. Cooper is biologically related to all of you." "What does that mean?" Tyler asked, his 11-year-old mind grappling with the concept. Sophia, more mature at 14, understood immediately. "Mr. Cooper is our biological father." Her voice cracked on the last word. Michelle nodded, tears flowing freely. "Yes, but your dad, the man who raised you, who loves you, he's still your father in every way that matters." Emma crawled into her mother's lap. "Is Daddy coming home?" "Not tonight, sweetheart," Michelle whispered. Brandon stood abruptly and walked to the mantel, where family photos chronicled 16 years of memories. He picked up a frame, showing Rick teaching him to ride a bike, both of them grinning at the camera. "How could you do this to him?" Brandon asked without turning around. "How could you lie to all of us for so long?" Michelle had no adequate answer. The weight of her deception pressed down on her as she faced her children's pain and confusion. At the county jail, Rick sat in a holding cell, still wearing his blood-stained clothes. His mind replayed the events of the day on an endless loop. The DNA results, Michelle's confession, the confrontation with James, the gunshot. Captain Williams visited him late that night. "Rick, I've arranged for David Martinez to represent you. He's the best defense attorney in the city." Rick looked up with hollow eyes. "Does it matter? I shot an unarmed man in front of witnesses. The circumstances are extraordinary," Williams replied. "No jury will ignore that." In the hospital, James Cooper was recovering from surgery to repair his shoulder. Sarah sat beside his bed, her face a mixture of concern and fury. 16 years, James?" she asked when he finally opened his eyes. "You had an affair with our neighbor for 16 years? James winced, both from physical pain and shame. It wasn't continuous. There were periods when it stopped. "And you fathered 4 children, Sarah's voice rose. 4 children who lived. Next door, who played with our kids, who called you Mr. Cooper while you knew you were their father. "I never wanted this to happen," James whispered. "But it did happen," Sarah snapped. "And now a good man is in jail because of your lies." She stood, gathering her purse. "I'm taking the kids to my mother's. Don't try to contact us." The next morning, news of the incident spread through Oak Grove like wildfire. The quiet suburb had never seen such scandal. A respected police detective, a shocking affair, a DNA revelation, an attempted murder. Reporters camped outside both houses, eager for any tidbit of information. Michelle kept her children home from school, trying to shield them from the media frenzy. She hired an attorney to handle both the impending divorce and custody arrangements. Her primary concern was protecting her children from further trauma. In jail, Rick met with his attorney, David Martinez. The seasoned lawyer reviewed the facts. "With professional detachment, the prosecutor is offering a deal," Martinez explained. "Plead guilty to aggravated assault, serve 5 years, possibility of parole in 3. Rick shook his head. "I want a trial. I want everyone to know what they did to me." "Rick, a trial will destroy your family even more. The media will have a field day. Your children will suffer the most." "They're not my children," Rick repeated, though with less conviction than before. "With all due respect, Detective, that's bullshit and you know it," Martinez replied firmly. "You raised those kids. You changed their diapers, taught them to read, dried their tears. Biology doesn't erase that." The words struck a chord, but Rick's anger still simmered beneath the surface. "What about James? What charges is he facing?" "None. Adultery isn't a crime, and neither is paternity fraud in this state." Rick slammed his fist on the table. "So he gets away with destroying my life. He's in the hospital with a gunshot wound. His marriage is over, and his reputation is ruined. I'd say he's paying a price." Over the next several weeks, the Peterson family struggled to maintain any semblance of normalcy. Michelle filed for divorce, knowing Rick would never forgive her betrayal. She also sought full custody of the children, arguing that Rick's violent outburst made him unfit. The children returned to school, facing whispers and stares from classmates who had heard about the scandal. Brandon became increasingly withdrawn, refusing to discuss the situation with anyone. Sophia threw herself into her studies, seeking refuge in academic achievement. Tyler began acting out, getting into fights and talking back to teachers. Little Emma regressed to behaviors from her toddler years, bedwetting, tantrums, and separation anxiety. James Cooper was discharged from the hospital after a week. He returned to an empty house. Sarah had filed for divorce and moved with their children to her mother's home in Wisconsin. His real estate business suffered as clients distanced themselves from the scandal. The trial date was set for 6 months later. During this time, Rick underwent mandatory psychological evaluation. Dr. Patricia Reynolds, the court-appointed psychiatrist, diagnosed him with acute stress disorder resulting from the traumatic revelation. Detective Peterson experienced what we call a narcissistic injury, Dr. Reynolds explained in her report. His entire identity was built around being a husband and father. The DNA results shattered that identity in a single moment. As the trial approached, media coverage intensified. News outlets dubbed it the DNA detective scandal and the suburban love triangle gone wrong. Talk shows debated the ethics of paternity fraud and the consequences of long-term deception. Michelle faced her own struggles. Former friends avoided her at the grocery store. The children's teachers reported bullying incidents. She considered moving but worried about uprooting the children during such a traumatic time. Brandon, now 17, was called to testify at his father's trial. Standing in the witness box, he looked older than his years. The weight of the situation evident in his posture. "Brandon," the prosecutor began, "can you describe your relationship with your father before this incident?" Brandon's voice cracked as he spoke. "He was my hero. He coached my baseball team, helped with my homework, and taught me to drive. He was everything a dad should be." "And what changed after the DNA revelation?" "Nothing changed," Brandon replied, fiercely. "He's still my dad, no matter what any DNA test says." The testimony brought tears to many eyes in the courtroom, including Rick's. Hearing Brandon defend their relationship despite everything touched something deep within him. Sophia testified next, describing how Rick had always encouraged her dreams of becoming a doctor. "He spent hours helping me with science projects, researching colleges, telling me I could achieve anything I set my mind to." Tyler spoke about fishing trips and camping adventures, about how his father taught him to tie knots and identify constellations. Even Emma, brave beyond her 7 years, told the court how her daddy read her favorite stories every night and checked for monsters under her bed. When Michelle took the stand, the courtroom fell silent. She appeared smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of her actions. "I take full responsibility for what happened," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Rick was a wonderful husband and father. He didn't deserve any of this." The prosecutor pressed her about the affair, forcing her to admit to years of deception. "I was lonely, and I was weak," Michelle confessed. "I made terrible choices that hurt everyone I love." James Cooper's testimony proved pivotal. Still recovering from his gunshot wound, he took the stand with visible difficulty. "Rick Peterson is those children's fathers in every way that matters," he stated clearly. "I may have contributed DNA, but he gave them love, guidance, and a home. I'm truly sorry for the pain I've caused." The defense strategy focused on temporary insanity, arguing that the shock of the DNA revelation caused Rick to snap. Dr. Reynolds testified about the psychological impact of such a profound betrayal. "Imagine learning that your entire family life was built on a lie." she told the jury. The person you trusted most deceived you for 16 years. It's not surprising that Detective Peterson reacted with rage. Character witnesses from the police department spoke about Rick's exemplary record and dedication to both his job and family. They painted a picture of a man who had lived an honorable life until one devastating moment. In his closing argument, Martinez made an impassioned plea. Rick Peterson spent 16 years believing he was raising his biological children. In one moment, that belief was shattered. Can any of us honestly say we wouldn't react with rage in such a situation? The jury deliberated for 3 days. When they returned, they found Rick guilty of assault with a deadly weapon but recommended leniency. Given the extraordinary circumstances, the judge, acknowledging the unique nature of the case, sentenced him to 3 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 18 months, plus mandatory counseling. As Rick was led away in handcuffs, his children broke through the courtroom barriers. Brandon reached him first, wrapping his arms around his father. "I love you, Dad," he whispered. "Nothing will ever change that." One by one, each child embraced Rick, reaffirming their bond. Even Michelle approached, her eyes filled with regret. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I'll bring them to visit you every week." Rick nodded silently, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. As the bailiffs escorted him away, he looked back at his children, regardless of DNA, and felt a glimmer of hope amidst the ruins of his former life. The prison transport van rolled through the gates of Stateville Correctional Center, its passengers shackled and silent. Rick Peterson stared out the wire-reinforced window, watching his old life disappear behind concrete walls and razor wire. The reality of his situation finally sank in. He was now inmate DAR 47592, convicted of attempted murder. His first night in the cell block proved sleepless. The sounds of metal doors clanging, inmates shouting, and distant footsteps created a symphony of despair. Rick lay on his thin mattress, reliving the sequence of events that had brought him here. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw his children's faces at the trial, their love unwavering despite everything. Meanwhile, life continued outside the prison walls. Michelle returned to an empty house, the absence of Rick's presence palpable in every room. She found his coffee mug still sitting by the sink, a tangible reminder of the morning everything changed. The children struggled to adapt to this new reality. Sophia helped with household chores, Brandon took on a part-time job to assist with expenses, and Tyler retreated further into sullen rebellion. Emma suffered the most. At 7, she couldn't comprehend why her father was gone or why people whispered when she walked past. She began having nightmares, crying out for her daddy in the darkness. Michelle would hold her, trying to explain concepts too complex for a child while battling her own guilt. In prison, Rick was assigned to work in the library. The irony wasn't lost on him. A detective cataloguing books instead of evidence. He threw himself into the task, finding solace in the orderly arrangement of literature. During his free time, he began attending counseling sessions with Dr. Marcus Thompson, the prison psychologist. "Tell me about your children," Dr. Thompson asked during their first meeting. Rick bristled. "They're not my children. Haven't you read my file?" "I've read it," the psychologist replied calmly. "But I'm asking about the children you raised, the ones who call you Dad." The sessions proved challenging. Rick struggled to reconcile his feelings of betrayal with his love for the children he'd nurtured. Dr. Thompson pushed him to examine his rigid definition of fatherhood, questioning whether DNA truly determined parental bonds. Back in Oak Grove, James Cooper attempted to rebuild his shattered life. His real estate business had collapsed, clients unwilling to work with the man at the center of such scandal. Sarah had filed for divorce and moved away with their children, leaving him alone in the house next door to the family he'd destroyed. He made several attempts to reach out to Michelle, but she refused all contact. "You've done enough damage," she told him during one phone call. "Stay away from my children." "They're my children too," James protested. "No," Michelle replied firmly. "You were just a sperm donor. Rick is their father." The community's judgment proved harsh. James found himself ostracized, former friends crossing the street to avoid him. He eventually sold his house at a loss and moved to a small apartment across town, working odd jobs to pay his mounting legal bills. 3 months into Rick's sentence, Brandon visited alone. Now 18 and legally an adult, he sat across from his father in the stark visitation room, separated by thick glass. "Mom doesn't know I'm here," Brandon admitted. "She thinks I'm at basketball practice." Rick studied his son, regardless of biology, noting the new maturity in his features. "How is everyone?" Brandon hesitated. "Sophia's maintaining straight A's, but she stopped talking about becoming a doctor. Says she wants to be a lawyer now, to help people like you. Tyler got suspended for fighting again, and Emma, she cries every night." The words cut deeper than any physical wound. Rick pressed his palm against the glass. "I'm so sorry, Brandon, for everything." "This isn't your fault, Dad." Brandon placed his hand opposite Rick's, the barrier between them both physical and metaphorical. "Mom and James did this, not you." "I pulled the trigger," Rick reminded him. "Because they broke you," Brandon insisted. "Anyone would have snapped." The conversation shifted to Brandon's college plans. He'd been accepted to Northwestern University, but was considering deferring to help Michelle with the younger children. Rick adamantly opposed this idea. "You're going to college," he stated firmly. "Don't let my mistakes derail your future." "They're not your mistakes, Dad. They're Mom's." The anger in Brandon's voice concerned Rick. He recognized the same rage that had consumed him, threatening to poison his son's future. "Brandon, listen to me," Rick said urgently. "What your mother did was wrong, but holding on to anger will only hurt you. Trust me, I know." Their time ended too quickly, the guard signaling for visitors to leave. As Brandon stood, he pressed a folded piece of paper against the glass. "It's a letter from Emma," he explained. "She drew you a picture." Later, alone in his cell, Rick unfolded the paper. A crayon drawing showed their family, stick figures holding hands in front of their house. Emma had drawn herself, holding Rick's hand, a bright yellow sun beaming overhead. Her printed words below read, "I miss you, Daddy. Please come home." Rick wept for the first time since his arrest. The next morning, he requested additional counseling sessions. Dr. Thompson noted the change in his demeanor, a crack in the wall of anger he'd built around himself. "What changed?" the psychologist asked. Rick showed him Emma's drawing. "I realized I'm still hurting them, even from here. My anger is affecting my children." This breakthrough marked a turning point in Rick's rehabilitation. He began participating in group therapy, sharing his story with other inmates. Many related to his sense of betrayal, though few had experienced such extreme circumstances. One evening, Rick received an unexpected visitor, Captain Williams. His former boss looked uncomfortable in the visitation room, fidgeting with his hat. "The department misses you," Williams began awkwardly. "Your solve rate was the highest in the precinct." "I'm sure someone's taken my desk by now," Rick replied. With a bitter smile, Williams shook his head. "We're holding your position. After everything, well, most of us understand why you snapped." The conversation revealed that Officer Rodriguez had been visiting Michelle and the children regularly, helping with household repairs and offering support. Several other officers had established a fund to help with the family's expenses. "Blue looks after its own," Williams explained, "even when they make mistakes." The news lifted Rick's spirits. Knowing his colleagues hadn't abandoned his family eased some of his guilt. He began writing letters to his children, though he wasn't sure Michelle would allow them to read them. 6 months into his sentence, Rick's lawyer filed for an appeal based on new evidence. Dr. Reynolds, the psychiatrist who had testified at his trial, had conducted additional research on cases of paternity fraud. Her findings suggested that Rick's reaction fell within the range of temporary insanity, particularly given the extreme nature of the deception. The appeal process moved slowly through the legal system, but it gave Rick hope. He continued his therapy, working through years of suppressed emotions. Dr. Thompson helped him understand that his identity as a father transcended biological connections. Consider adoptive parents, the psychologist pointed out. They share no DNA with their children, yet their love is just as real. Michelle, meanwhile, struggled with her own journey of redemption. She attended therapy sessions confronting the choices that led to 16 years of deception. Her therapist helped her understand the patterns of behavior that enabled such prolonged dishonesty. "I convinced myself I was protecting everyone," Michelle admitted during one session, "but I was really just protecting myself from consequences." She began rebuilding trust with her children, having honest conversations about her actions and their impact. Sophia proved the most forgiving, perhaps understanding the complexities of adult relationships better than her siblings. Tyler remained angry, his adolescent mind struggling to reconcile his mother's betrayal with his love for her. Brandon kept his distance, moving into Northwestern's dormitories earlier than necessary. He visited Rick monthly, maintaining their relationship while struggling to forgive Michelle. His anger toward James Cooper burned even brighter, especially after learning that James had established trust funds for all 4 children. He thinks, "Money can fix what he did," Brandon fumed during one prison visit, "like he can buy his way into being our father." Rick, having worked through much of his own anger, offered a different perspective. "The trust funds aren't for him, son. They're for you and your siblings. Don't let pride prevent you from accepting help that could secure your future." On the first anniversary of his incarceration, Rick received news that his appeal hearing had been scheduled. David Martinez visited to discuss strategy, optimistic about their chances given Dr. Reynolds' new research and Rick's exemplary behavior in prison. "You've completed anger management, maintained perfect conduct, and even helped 2 inmates earn their GEDs through the library program," Martinez noted. "The parole board will see you're not the same man who pulled that trigger." The appeal hearing took place on a cold February morning. Rick entered the courtroom in shackles, scanning the gallery for familiar faces. Michelle sat in the front row with all 4 children, their presence a testament to the bonds that transcended biology. Dr. Reynolds presented her new findings, explaining how paternity fraud created a unique form of psychological trauma. Detective Peterson experienced what we call genealogical bewilderment, she testified. The sudden severance of assumed biological connections can trigger profound identity crises and temporary breaks from reality. Character witnesses included Dr. Thompson, who spoke about Rick's progress in therapy, and several correctional officers who praised his conduct. Even James Cooper appeared against his lawyer's advice. "I'm responsible for this tragedy," James told the court. "Rick Peterson was a good man, a loving father, pushed beyond human endurance by my selfishness. If anyone deserves to be in prison, it's me, not him." The judges deliberated for 2 hours. When they returned, they commuted Rick's sentence to time served plus 2 years probation, citing extraordinary circumstances and exemplary rehabilitation. The courtroom erupted in cheers as Rick's children rushed to embrace him. Freedom proved more challenging than Rick anticipated. Returning to Oak Grove meant facing the community that had witnessed his downfall. He moved into a small apartment, unable to return to the house he'd shared with Michelle. The divorce had been finalized during his incarceration, with Michelle receiving the house and primary custody of the children. Rick's first priority was rebuilding relationships with his children. Emma adapted quickest, thrilled to have her daddy back. She insisted on weekly sleepovers at his apartment, bringing her favorite books for bedtime stories. Sophia visited regularly, discussing her college applications and dreams of law school. Tyler slowly warmed to him, their relationship strengthening through shared activities like fishing and basketball games. Brandon proved more complicated. Their prison visits had maintained their connection, but adjusting to normal father-son. Interactions took time. They met for coffee weekly, gradually rebuilding the easy rapport they'd once shared. The police department offered Rick his job back, but he declined. The trauma of the past year had changed him, and he no longer felt suited for law enforcement. Instead, he began working as a private investigator, using his detective skills in a different capacity. Michelle and Rick established a cordial co-parenting relationship, both committed to their children's well-being above all else. She continued therapy, working to rebuild trust within the family and the community. Some neighbors remained judgmental, but others offered forgiveness and support. James Cooper eventually moved out of state, accepting that his presence only caused more pain. He maintained the trust funds for the children, but respected their wishes for no contact. His marriage to Sarah ended in divorce, and he began rebuilding his life far from the wreckage he'd created. 2 years after the shooting, the Peterson family gathered for Emma's 9th birthday. Rick arrived with presents, welcomed warmly by all 4 children. Michelle watched from the doorway, a bittersweet smile on her face. They would never be the family they once were, but they had forged something new from the ruins. A family bound not by DNA, but by choice, love, and forgiveness. As Rick helped Emma blow out her candles, surrounded by the children he'd raised and loved, he realized that this, not biology, was what truly made him their father. The DNA test had shattered his world, but from those pieces they had built something stronger, more honest, and ultimately more meaningful than what had existed before. The scars would always remain, but they served as reminders of hard-won lessons about the nature of family, forgiveness, and the resilience of love. Rick understood now that fatherhood wasn't defined by genetic codes, but by the countless moments of care, guidance, and unconditional love he'd given his children throughout their lives. In the end, the Peterson case became more than just a cautionary tale about the destructive power of deception. It stood as testament to the enduring bonds of family and the possibility of redemption, even in the face of the most devastating betrayals. Several months after Rick's release, an unexpected development sent shockwaves through the community once again. Detective Linda Martinez, who had taken over Rick's open cases, discovered a disturbing pattern while reviewing old evidence files. The DNA processing facility that had handled Rick's paternity tests had been involved in a wider corruption scandal. She brought her findings to Captain Williams, laying out a series of documents that painted a troubling picture. 3 lab technicians at the facility were accepting bribes to alter results, Martinez explained. We've identified at least 7 cases where DNA evidence was tampered with. Williams leaned forward, his expression grave. Are you suggesting Rick's tests were compromised? Martinez nodded. I've tracked financial records showing a $50,000 payment to one of the implicated technicians the day before Rick received his results. The money was wired from an offshore account, but our cybercrimes unit traced it back to a domestic source. The implications were staggering. If the DNA results had been falsified, it meant the entire tragedy might have been orchestrated. Williams immediately ordered new tests to be conducted at an independent facility. Rick received the news while working on a missing persons case in his private investigation office. When Martinez called with the information, he dropped his phone, his mind reeling with possibilities. Could the children actually be his? Has someone deliberately destroyed his family? Michelle was equally stunned when informed. She sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by the same spot where her marriage had ended, trying to process this new reality. "Who would do something like this?" she asked Martinez. "Who would want to destroy us?" The detective hesitated before answering. "We're still investigating, but initial evidence points to someone with significant resources and a personal vendetta against either you or Rick." As news of the potential falsification spread, the media descended once again. This time, public sentiment shifted dramatically. The narrative transformed from a tale of betrayal to one of possible conspiracy. Rick, once vilified, now appeared to be a victim of an elaborate scheme. New DNA samples were collected from Rick, all 4 children, Michelle and James Cooper. The testing process was monitored meticulously, with representatives from both the police department and independent observers present throughout. During the weeks awaiting results, strange incidents began occurring. Rick's office was broken into, though nothing appeared to be stolen. Michelle received anonymous threatening letters warning her to stop digging. Brandon's dorm room at Northwestern was ransacked, and Sophia noticed unfamiliar cars parked outside their house. These events convinced Rick that someone powerful was trying to cover their tracks. He began his own investigation, utilizing contacts from his years on the force. What he uncovered shocked him to his core. The trail led to Vincent Calabrese, a wealthy developer Rick had investigated 5 years earlier for suspected money laundering. Though Calabrese had avoided charges due to lack of evidence, he'd harbored a deep grudge against Rick for nearly destroying his business empire. He wanted revenge, Rick explained to Martinez and Williams during a clandestine meeting. He knew the one thing that would destroy me was my family. The new DNA results arrived on a rainy Tuesday morning. Rick, Michelle, and their children gathered at the police station, along with James Cooper and his attorney. Dr. Patricia Nguyen, the independent geneticist overseeing the tests, entered the conference room with a sealed envelope. "I want to preface this by saying these results have been verified multiple times using the most advanced techniques available," Dr. Nguyen began. She opened the envelope and laid out several documents. "Detective Peterson, you are the biological father of Brandon, Sophia, and Tyler Peterson. Emma Peterson's biological father is James Cooper." The room fell silent as everyone processed this information. 3 of the 4 children were Rick's. Only Emma shared DNA with James Cooper. Michelle broke down completely. "I don't understand," she sobbed. "How is this possible?" The truth emerged gradually. Michelle's affair with James had been brief, occurring only during a particularly difficult period in her marriage when Emma was conceived. The original DNA tests had been manipulated to show all 4 children as James's, maximizing the emotional damage to Rick. James sat stunned, the reality of having only one biological child among the 4 he'd claimed hitting him hard. Emma, now 9, looked confused and frightened by the adults' reactions. Rick knelt before his youngest daughter. "Emma, sweetie, this doesn't change anything between us. I'm still your daddy, and I always will be." The revelation sparked a new investigation into Calabrese's activities. Federal authorities joined the case, uncovering a complex web of corruption that extended beyond the DNA tampering. The lab technicians who had falsified the results testified in exchange for reduced sentences, confirming Calabrese's involvement. Calabrese was arrested at his penthouse apartment, charged with conspiracy, fraud, and obstruction of justice. During his trial, the full extent of his vendetta against Rick came to light. He had spent nearly $1 million orchestrating the scheme, including bribing lab technicians, hiring private investigators to surveil the Peterson family, and manipulating evidence. "I wanted him to feel what it was like to lose everything," Calabrese admitted during cross-examination. "He cost me my reputation, my business partners. I decided to cost him his family." The trial lasted 3 weeks, culminating in Calabrese's conviction on all charges. He received a 15-year sentence, with the judge citing the extraordinary malice of his actions. For the Peterson family, healing began anew. Rick filed a civil lawsuit against Calabrese and the DNA testing facility, eventually receiving a substantial settlement. But money couldn't repair the emotional damage or lost time. Rick and Michelle entered intensive family therapy, working to understand how vulnerability in their marriage had created an opening for manipulation. Though they would never reunite as husband and wife, they developed a stronger co-parenting relationship built on honesty and mutual respect. The children processed the revelations differently. Brandon, Sophia, and Tyler felt relief at confirming their biological connection to Rick, though they struggled with anger toward Calabrese for orchestrating such pain. Emma faced the most complex adjustment, learning at age 9 that her biological father was actually James Cooper. James requested limited visitation rights with Emma, which Rick and Michelle granted after careful consideration. They established boundaries to ensure Emma's emotional well-being remained the priority. James proved respectful of these limits, gradually building a relationship with his biological daughter while acknowledging Rick's role as her primary father. The community's reaction shifted once again. Those who had shunned the family now offered apologies and support. Rick received numerous requests to share his story at law enforcement conferences, becoming an advocate for reform in DNA testing protocols and evidence handling. 2 years after the truth emerged, Rick returned to the Chicago Police Department as a consultant, focusing on cases involving evidence tampering and corruption. His experience had given him unique insights into how personal vendettas could compromise investigations. Michelle pursued a degree in counseling, inspired by her own journey through therapy. She specialized in helping families navigate complex relationship dynamics and betrayal trauma. Her practice grew quickly, with many clients drawn to her personal understanding of such issues. Brandon graduated from Northwestern with honors, choosing to attend law school to fight against judicial corruption. Sophia entered medical school, her dream of becoming a doctor reignited. Tyler channeled his earlier anger into advocacy work, volunteering with organizations supporting families affected by legal system failures. Emma, now 11, thrived despite the unconventional dynamics of her family. She maintained relationships with both Rick and James, understanding that love wasn't limited by biology. Her resilience inspired everyone around her. On the 5th anniversary of that fateful day, when Rick first received the falsified DNA results, the family gathered for a picnic in the park. Rick watched his children, all 4 of them, playing together, their laughter carrying on the breeze. Michelle sat nearby, not as his wife, but as the mother of his children and a trusted co-parent. James attended briefly, maintaining the respectful distance they'd established. He brought Emma a birthday gift. Her birthday was next week, and spent a few supervised hours with her before departing. As the sun set, Rick reflected on their journey. The fabricated DNA results had led to unimaginable pain, but uncovering the truth had ultimately made them stronger. They had learned that family bonds transcended biology, that forgiveness could heal the deepest wounds, and that truth, no matter how difficult, was always better than deception. The Peterson case became a landmark in legal history, prompting nationwide reforms in DNA testing procedures and evidence handling. It served as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked revenge and the vulnerability of even the most sophisticated forensic processes to corruption. But for Rick and his family, it was simply their story, a testament to resilience, love, and the unbreakable bonds between a father and his children. They had survived betrayal, manipulation, and near destruction to emerge stronger, wiser, and more united than ever before. As they packed up their picnic supplies, Emma tugged on Rick's hand. "Daddy, can we do this again next week for my birthday?" Rick smiled, lifting her into his arms. "Of course, sweetheart. We'll do this every year." And they did, creating new traditions and memories that honored their past while embracing their future. The Peterson family had been tested in ways few could imagine, but they proved that love, real, unconditional love, could overcome even the most carefully orchestrated attempts to destroy it. Their story ended not with bitterness or regret, but with hope and renewal. They had learned that family wasn't defined by DNA alone, but by the countless acts of love, sacrifice, and forgiveness that bound them together. In surviving Vincent Calabrese's vendetta, they discovered something precious. Their bonds were unbreakable, their love unconditional, and their family stronger than any force that tried to tear them apart. The scars remained, but they wore them proudly as badges of survival. The Peterson case would be studied, discussed, and remembered for years to come, but for Rick and his children, it was simply the story of how they found their way back to each other, emerging from darkness into a brighter, more honest future. 6. Months after Vincent Calabrese's conviction, an investigation into his remaining assets uncovered a hidden safe deposit box in a Swiss bank. Inside, federal agents found detailed journals documenting his revenge plot against Rick Peterson, along with something that would shake the case to its core once again. Video recordings of Michelle Peterson visiting Calabrese's office multiple times before the DNA tampering occurred. Detective Linda Martinez watched the footage with growing unease. In one video, dated 3 weeks before Rick received his DNA results, Michelle sat across from Calabrese, accepting an envelope. Their conversation, captured by hidden cameras, revealed a conspiracy more complex than anyone had imagined. "The lab technician will need this information to make the results convincing," Calabrese was heard saying. "Are you sure you want to go through with this?" Michelle's response chilled Martinez to the bone. "Rick's been unfaithful to me for years. It's time he understood how betrayal feels." The revelation triggered a new investigation. When confronted with the evidence, Michelle broke down in the interrogation room. Through tears, she confessed to orchestrating the entire scheme with Calabrese, driven by her discovery of Rick's affair with a young detective named Sandra Collins. "I found text messages on his phone," Michelle explained, her voice barely audible. "They'd been seeing each other for 2 years. When I confronted him, he promised to end it. But I knew he was lying. The affair had indeed occurred, though Rick had ended it 6 months before the DNA test incident. Michelle, consumed by hurt and anger, had sought revenge. She knew about Calabrese's grudge against Rick from overhearing phone calls, and decided to approach him with a proposition. "I never slept with James Cooper," Michelle admitted. "Emma is Rick's daughter, just like the others. But I knew Rick would never forgive infidelity, so I let him believe the worst." The conspiracy ran deeper than anyone suspected. Michelle had paid James Cooper $100,000 to corroborate the story, preying on his financial struggles after his real estate business failed. James, desperate to save his family from bankruptcy, agreed to play the role of Michelle's lover and the children's biological father. When this information reached Rick, he sat in stunned silence in his office. The woman he had loved, the mother of his children, had orchestrated his complete destruction as revenge for his own infidelity. The irony was devastating. Brandon, now a law student, took the news the hardest. He had spent years defending his mother, believing her to be a victim rather than the architect of their family's destruction. When he confronted her at the county jail, their conversation exposed the depths of the deception. "You let Dad go to prison," Brandon said, his voice shaking with rage. "You watched him suffer, watched us suffer, knowing it was all a lie." Michelle reached for his hand through the bars, but he recoiled. "I never meant for him to shoot James. I thought he'd just divorce me, learn what heartbreak felt like." "And us?" Brandon demanded. "What about your children? Did you think about what this would do to us?" "I was so angry," Michelle whispered. "I couldn't see past my own pain." The truth about Sandra Collins emerged during the renewed investigation. Rick's affair had begun during a particularly stressful case involving child trafficking. Sandra, a junior detective, had provided emotional support that evolved into a physical relationship. Overwhelmed by guilt, Rick had ended things with Sandra and recommitted to his marriage, unaware that Michelle had already discovered his betrayal. Sandra testified at Michelle's trial, her remorse evident. "I knew it was wrong," she told the court. "Rick was a good man, trapped in a difficult situation. When he ended things, I respected his decision. I had no idea Michelle knew about us." The trial revealed the full extent of Michelle's planning. She had researched DNA testing procedures, identified corruptible lab technicians through Calabresi's connections, and carefully planted evidence to support her fabricated narrative. Bank records showed she had withdrawn their children's college funds to finance the scheme. James Cooper testified under immunity, describing how Michelle had approached him at his lowest point. She said she needed someone to pose as her lover, that it was the only way to make Rick understand her pain. "When she offered the money, I couldn't refuse. My family was about to lose everything." The community reeled from these revelations. Those who had supported Michelle through the ordeal felt betrayed and manipulated. Rick received apologies from neighbors who had shunned him, while Michelle faced universal condemnation. During her sentencing hearing, Michelle made a final statement. "I let jealousy and revenge consume me. I destroyed my family, traumatized my children, and nearly got 2 men killed. I deserve whatever punishment the court decides." The judge sentenced Michelle to 12 years in prison for conspiracy, fraud, and reckless endangerment. As she was led away, she looked back at her children one last time. Only Emma waved goodbye. Rick focused on rebuilding his relationship with his children, particularly Emma, who struggled to understand why her mother would create such an elaborate lie. Therapy helped the family process this new trauma, though trust remained fragile. Brandon threw himself into legal reform advocacy, working to strengthen laws against paternity fraud and evidence tampering. Sophia continued her medical studies, determined to help families affected by psychological trauma. Tyler found solace in art therapy, creating powerful pieces that expressed the confusion and pain of living through multiple versions of truth. Emma, remarkably resilient, maintained correspondence with Michelle in prison while strengthening her bond with Rick. She wrote letters filled with questions about trust, forgiveness, and the complexity of adult relationships. James Cooper, cleared of wrongdoing beyond accepting. Michelle's bribe, attempted to rebuild his life. He repaid the $100,000 using the settlement from his lawsuit against Calabresi and dedicated himself to community service. His relationship with Sarah remained severed, but he maintained civil contact with their children. The case prompted nationwide discussions about revenge, forgiveness, and the collateral damage of adult conflicts on children. Legal experts debate the implications of paternity fraud laws, while mental health professionals studied the psychological impact of such profound deception. 2 years after Michelle's conviction, Rick received an unexpected visit from Vincent Calabresi's daughter, Maria. She had discovered her father's journals and wanted to apologize for his actions. "He became obsessed with destroying you," Maria explained. When Michelle approached him, he saw an opportunity to inflict maximum pain. "I'm ashamed of what he did." Rick accepted her apology, recognizing that she too was a victim of her father's choices. Their conversation led to a support group for families affected by revenge crimes, providing resources and counseling for those caught in similar situations. On the 10th anniversary of the original DNA test, the Peterson children gathered at Rick's home for a family dinner. Brendan, now a successful attorney specializing in family law, brought his fiancée. Sophia, completing her residency in psychiatry, arrived with research she'd conducted on family trauma. Tyler displayed his latest artwork at a local gallery, while Emma, a high school senior, discussed her college applications. They spoke openly about their journey, acknowledging the pain while celebrating their resilience. Michelle's betrayal had shattered them, but they had chosen to rebuild rather than remain broken. Rick raised his glass for a toast. To tell the truth, no matter how difficult. To forgiveness, no matter how challenging. And to family, not defined by DNA or deception, but by the choice to love each other through everything. As they clinked glasses, each reflected on the lessons learned. Their story had become a cautionary tale about the destructive power of revenge and the healing potential of truth. They had survived manipulation, conspiracy, and betrayal to emerge stronger, bound by something more powerful than biology or deception. The conscious decision to remain a family despite everything designed to tear them apart. The Peterson case, closed not with dramatic revelations or courtroom theatrics, but with quiet determination to move forward. They had learned that family wasn't about genetic connections or perfect relationships, but about choosing to love, forgive, and support each other through life's most challenging moments. Their story served as a powerful reminder that even the most carefully constructed lies eventually crumble, and that truth, however painful, offers the only foundation for genuine healing and growth. In the end, the Peterson family proved that love could indeed conquer all, even the most elaborate schemes designed to destroy it. In the years following Michelle's imprisonment, the Peterson family found themselves at the center of a national conversation about trust, deception, and the nature of family bonds. Their story became required study in law enforcement academies, legal ethics courses, and psychology programs across the country. Rick published a memoir titled Beyond DNA, A Father's Journey Through Deception and Redemption, which became a bestseller. The book detailed not only the conspiracy against him, but also his own moral failings, including the affair with Sandra Collins that had set everything in motion. His honesty about his own mistakes resonated with readers and helped other families navigate similar crises. During a book tour stop in Seattle, Rick encountered an unexpected visitor, Detective Sandra Collins, now married and working in a different precinct. Their meeting in the hotel lobby was tense but necessary. "I've carried guilt about this for years," Sandra admitted. "I knew you were married, and I pursued you anyway during a vulnerable time." Rick shook his head. "We both made mistakes, but look at what those mistakes cost. Not just us, but innocent people." Their conversation evolved into a discussion about implementing ethics training for police departments, focusing on personal relationships and professional boundaries. Together, they developed a program that would eventually be adopted by departments nationwide. Meanwhile, Brandon's legal career flourished as he specialized in cases involving familial fraud and evidence tampering. He successfully argued for legislative changes that made paternity fraud a criminal offense in several states, requiring mandatory prison time for those who deliberately misled partners about biological parentage. One of Brandon's most significant cases involved a woman who had convinced her husband to raise 3 children that weren't his, similar to what his mother had attempted. During the trial, Brandon delivered a powerful closing argument. The damage of this deception extends far beyond the individuals directly involved. Children lose their sense of identity, extended families are torn apart, and the very foundation of trust in society is eroded. We must send a clear message that such manipulation will not be tolerated. Sophia's psychiatric practice focused on treating families affected by what she termed catastrophic deception. Her research paper on the psychological impact of paternity fraud became required reading in medical schools. She often used her own family's experience as a case study, demonstrating how healing was possible even after profound betrayal. Tyler channeled his experiences into art that toured galleries internationally. His series, Fractured Truths, depicted abstract representations of family bonds being tested and reformed. One piece, showing 4 trees with intertwined roots despite different DNA patterns, became particularly famous. The Metropolitan Museum of Art acquired it for their permanent collection. Emma's journey proved the most complex. As she approached her 20th birthday, she requested permission to visit Michelle in prison. Rick struggled with the decision, but ultimately agreed, recognizing Emma's need for closure. The prison meeting room felt sterile as Emma sat across from her mother, now graying and wearing standard-issue clothing. Michelle's hands trembled as she reached across the table. "I've written you so many letters I never sent," Michelle began. "I was afraid of what you'd think of me." Emma's response was measured but firm. "I needed to see you, to understand why you did this to us." Michelle's explanation revealed deeper layers of dysfunction in her own childhood. "My father cheated on my mother repeatedly. I watched her suffer in silence, always forgiving, always accepting. I swore I'd never be like her." "So you became worse," Emma challenged. "You didn't just confront Dad about his affair, you tried to destroy him completely." The conversation lasted 2 hours, ending with Emma walking out without looking back. But something had shifted. Not forgiveness exactly, but a kind of understanding that allowed her to move forward. A year later, a documentary crew approached the Peterson family about creating a comprehensive examination of their case. After lengthy discussions, they agreed, seeing it as an opportunity to help others avoid similar situations. The documentary, titled The DNA Deception, premiered at the Sundance Film Festival to critical acclaim. It featured interviews with all parties involved, including Michelle from prison and James Cooper, who had relocated to Oregon and started a non-profit helping families affected by financial fraud. During filming, the crew uncovered additional evidence about Vincent Calabrese's operations. His revenge schemes extended beyond the Peterson family. He had orchestrated similar plots against 3 other law enforcement officers who had investigated him. This revelation led to additional charges and extended his sentence. The documentary's most powerful moment came when Rick and his 4 children sat together for a joint interview. When asked about forgiveness, each offered a different perspective. Brandon spoke first. "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or excusing. It means choosing not to let anger define your future." Sophia added, "From a psychiatric perspective, holding on to resentment is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. We had to let go of our own healing," Tyler expressed himself through metaphor. "Our family is like a piece of art that was shattered and reassembled. The cracks are visible, but they're part of what makes it beautiful now." Emma, the youngest but perhaps the wisest, concluded, "DNA didn't make Dad my father. Love did, and no conspiracy could change that." Following the documentary's release, the Peterson case became part of law school curricula nationwide. Legal scholars debated the implications of using DNA testing as a weapon, while ethicists examined the moral complexities of revenge versus justice. Rick returned to law enforcement as a consultant, specializing in cases involving complex fraud and evidence manipulation. His unique experience made him invaluable in identifying patterns of deception that others might miss. He also met monthly with a support group for men who had discovered they weren't their children's biological fathers, offering guidance on maintaining relationships with the children they'd raised. On Michelle's release, after serving 8 years of her sentence, she emerged to find a world transformed by technology and social awareness. Her children, now adults, maintained minimal contact, though Emma occasionally sent updates about family milestones. Michelle moved to a small town in Maine, working at a local library and attending therapy sessions twice weekly. She never remarried, dedicating her life to understanding and atoning for her actions. In her spare time, she wrote letters to women's prisons, warning inmates about the consequences of letting revenge consume them. James Cooper's life took an unexpected turn when his non-profit work caught the attention of a major foundation. They offered funding to expand his programs nationally, helping families recover from financial deception. His own children, now adults, maintained distant but cordial relationships with him. The most surprising development came 15 years after the original incident. Researchers studying the long-term effects of familial deception contacted the Peterson family about participating in a groundbreaking study. The study revealed that children raised in loving homes showed remarkable resilience, even after discovering biological discrepancies, provided the emotional bonds remained strong. Rick, now in his 60s, often reflected on the journey his family had taken. Speaking at a conference on family law reform, he shared his final thoughts on the matter. Our story isn't just about DNA tests and revenge plots. It's about the choices we make when faced with betrayal. Do we let it destroy us, or do we use it to grow stronger? My children taught me that family isn't defined by genetic codes, but by the love we choose to give each other every day. The Peterson case fundamentally changed how society viewed paternity fraud, evidence tampering, and the psychological impact of deception. Laws were strengthened, support systems were established, and conversations about trust and forgiveness became more nuanced. As the family gathered for Rick's 70th birthday celebration, they looked around the table at the faces that had weathered such storms together. Brandon's children played with Sophia's twins, while Tyler's partner helped Emma set the table. New branches had grown from their family tree, untainted by the deceptions of the past. Rick raised his glass one final time. To truth, which set us free, to love, which kept us together, and to family, chosen, cherished, and unbreakable. The Peterson legacy lived on, not in the scandal that had nearly destroyed them, but in their demonstration that even the most elaborate lies couldn't triumph over genuine love and forgiveness. Their story became a beacon for others navigating similar betrayals, proving that while deception might fracture a family, truth and commitment could forge something even stronger from the pieces. In the end, the Peterson case stood as a testament to human resilience, the power of forgiveness, and the enduring nature of love that transcends biology. It reminded the world that family is not just about shared DNA, but about shared experiences, mutual support, and the conscious choice to remain connected despite life's most challenging revelations. 20 years after the original DNA revelation, a remarkable series of events would bring the Peterson story full circle in ways no one could have predicted. It began when Emma Peterson, now a successful investigative journalist, received an anonymous email containing encrypted files about a secret government program called Operation Family Tree. The program, initiated in the early 2000s, had been collecting DNA samples from citizens without their knowledge, ostensibly for national security purposes. Emma's investigation revealed that several private laboratories, including the one that had processed Rick's tests, were involved in this clandestine operation. As Emma dug deeper, she discovered a connection that chilled her to the core. Vincent Calabresi hadn't acted alone in his vendetta against her father. He was part of a larger network of wealthy individuals who used DNA manipulation as a tool for blackmail and revenge against law enforcement officials who had investigated them. The genetic mafia, as they were dubbed in Emma's exposé, had victimized at least 30 families across the country. The group included corrupt politicians, business tycoons, and even a federal judge who had used falsified paternity tests to destroy the careers of prosecutors who had challenged their authority. Emma brought her findings to Brandon, now a prominent civil rights attorney. Together they assembled a legal team that included their sister Sophia, whose psychiatric expertise proved invaluable in documenting the psychological damage inflicted on victims. The case they built was unprecedented in scope. During a press conference announcing their class action lawsuit, Brandon declared, "This isn't just about individual acts of revenge. This is about a systematic assault on the very concept of truth in our society." The trial lasted 18 months and captivated the nation. Rick testified as both a victim and an expert witness, his years of experience investigating fraud lending credibility to the prosecution's case. His testimony about the night he discovered the truth about his children moved many jurors to tears. Michelle, released from prison but living quietly in Maine, was called to testify about her recruitment by Calabrese. Her appearance in court marked the first time all 5 Petersons had been in the same room in over a decade. The moment wasn't lost on the media, who captured the complex emotions playing across their faces. "I was a perfect target," Michelle explained from the witness stand. "Angry, hurt, and willing to believe the worst about my husband, they knew exactly which buttons to push." Her testimony revealed that Calabrese had manipulated her emotions, feeding her false information about Rick's supposed ongoing affairs to keep her committed to the conspiracy. Text messages and emails showed how he had groomed her resentment, turning a moment of weakness into a weapon of mass destruction. The trial's most dramatic moment came when Tyler Peterson presented a multimedia installation in the courtroom. Using his artistic skills and advanced technology, he created a visual representation of how the conspiracy had rippled through dozens of families, destroying relationships, careers, and lives. "Each line represents a family bond," Tyler explained, as glowing threads connected figures on a massive screen. "Watch what happens when deception enters the system." The threads turned red and began to fray, eventually snapping as the figures drifted apart. Then slowly, new connections formed, different colors, different patterns, but ultimately creating a new, stronger network. "This is what survival looks like," Tyler concluded. "Not the restoration of what was, but the creation of something new." The defense attempted to paint the DNA manipulation as isolated incidents, but Emma's investigation had been thorough. She produced evidence of regular meetings, shared resources, and coordinated attacks spanning 15 years. James Cooper, who had transformed his life after the original scandal, provided crucial testimony about how he had been targeted during his financial struggles. "They knew I was desperate," he testified. "They offered me money to play a role, but they never told me the full scope of what they were doing." His testimony helped establish a pattern of exploitation, showing how the conspirators preyed on vulnerable individuals to execute their schemes. The jury deliberated for 2 weeks before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. The judge's sentencing remarks became famous. "You didn't just tamper with evidence, you tampered with the very essence of human identity. Your actions strike at the heart of what makes us a civilized society." 15 defendants received sentences ranging from 20 years to life. The government was forced to acknowledge Operation Family Tree and implement strict oversight measures. For DNA testing facilities, new laws were passed requiring multiple independent verifications for any DNA evidence used in legal proceedings. The Peterson family used their portion of the massive settlement to establish the Truth in Testing Foundation, dedicated to preventing DNA fraud and supporting affected families. Rick served as its first director, working alongside former victims to create support networks and advocate for policy changes. Brandon successfully argued for Emma's law before the Supreme Court, establishing that deliberately falsifying paternity tests constituted a form of psychological assault. The law provided both criminal penalties and civil remedies for victims. Sophia published a landmark study on genetic gaslighting, examining how DNA deception affected mental health across generations. Her research led to new treatment protocols for what she termed biological identity trauma. Tyler's art evolved to focus on healing and reconciliation. His exhibition, Rewriting the Code, toured internationally, featuring interactive installations that allowed visitors to explore their own definitions of family and belonging. Emma won a Pulitzer Prize for her investigative series on the genetic mafia. She continued to uncover similar conspiracies worldwide, becoming a leading voice in the fight against biotechnological abuse. On the 25th anniversary of the original DNA test, the Peterson family gathered at their childhood home, now converted into a museum documenting their journey. Rick, in his late 70s but still sharp, stood before a crowd of supporters, survivors, and media. What began as a personal tragedy became a catalyst for national change, he reflected. We learned that truth isn't always found in test tubes or lab reports. Sometimes it's found in the choices we make, the love we give, and the forgiveness we offer. Michelle watched the ceremony from a distance, having been invited by Emma, but choosing to remain apart. In the letter read by her daughter, she wrote, "I spent years trapped in a web of lies. Some told to me, some I told myself. My greatest hope is that our story prevents others from making the same mistakes." The gathering concluded with the unveiling of a memorial to all families affected by DNA fraud. The sculpture, designed by Tyler, showed figures emerging from shattered double helixes, reaching toward each other in gestures of connection and support. As the sun set on the ceremony, Brandon addressed the crowd one final time. "We stand here, not as victims, but as victors, not because we weren't hurt, but because we chose healing over hatred. Our family was tested in ways few can imagine, and we emerged stronger, wiser, and more committed to truth than ever before." The Peterson case became more than just a cautionary tale. It became a blueprint for systemic change. Law schools taught it as an example of how personal tragedy could drive legal reform. Psychology programs used it to explore the nature of family bonds beyond biology. Ethics courses examined the moral implications of genetic manipulation. In his final years, Rick often said that the greatest lesson he learned wasn't about DNA or deception, but about the resilience of love. Family, he would tell audiences, isn't something that can be created or destroyed in a laboratory. It's forged in the daily choices we make to stand by each other, especially when the truth threatens to tear us apart. The Peterson legacy lived on through the countless families they helped, the laws they changed, and the awareness they raised about the sanctity of truth in an age of technological manipulation. Their story reminded the world that even in the face of elaborate deception, authentic human connections could not only survive, but thrive. As Rick Peterson took his final breath, surrounded by his children, all four of them, he smiled, knowing that no conspiracy, no matter how intricate, could break the bonds they had chosen to forge through forgiveness, understanding, and unconditional love. Their family had been tested by fire and emerged not just intact, but transformed into something stronger than biology alone could ever create. 3 decades after the fateful DNA test that shattered their world, the Peterson family faced one last shocking revelation that would redefine everything they thought they knew about their story. It began when Emma's daughter, Sarah Peterson Williams, a brilliant geneticist following in her Aunt Sophia's scientific footsteps, made a startling discovery while researching inherited trauma patterns. Sarah had been studying epigenetic markers, chemical modifications to DNA that can be influenced by environmental factors and passed down through generations. Her research focused on families affected by severe psychological trauma, using the Peterson case as a primary example. What she found during a routine analysis of her family's genetic samples would send shockwaves through the scientific community. "Aunt Sophia, you need to see this immediately." Sarah's voice trembled over the phone. "I've found something in our family's DNA that doesn't make sense." At her state-of-the-art laboratory, Sarah revealed her findings to Sophia, Brandon, Tyler, and Emma. The data showed unusual genetic markers in all 4 Peterson siblings that couldn't be explained by standard inheritance patterns. These markers suggested exposure to a rare chemical compound typically found only in specialized medical research facilities. This compound, Sarah explained, pointing to molecular diagrams on her screen, is used in experimental fertility treatments. But here's what's strange. It appears in all 4 of your DNA samples, despite you having different biological fathers, according to the records. Brandon, ever the lawyer, immediately grasped the implications. "Are you saying there's another layer to this conspiracy we haven't uncovered?" The investigation that followed led them to Dr. Harold Weissman, a disgraced fertility specialist who had lost his license in the late 1990s for conducting unauthorized experiments. Weissman, now in his 80s and living in a nursing home, initially refused to speak with them. But when confronted with Sarah's evidence, he broke down. "Your mother came to me before she was married," Weissman confessed, his hands shaking. "She was part of a clinical trial for a new fertility treatment. The procedure was designed to increase the likelihood of conception and potentially influence certain genetic traits." The revelation stunned everyone. Michelle had never mentioned fertility treatments, and all records of the trial had been destroyed when Weissman's clinic was shut down. Further investigation revealed that Vincent Calabrese had discovered this information during his vendetta against Rick and used it to manipulate the DNA testing process. "The compound we used," Weissman continued, "had unexpected effects on DNA analysis. It created anomalies that could be exploited to produce false results if someone knew what to look for. This explained why the original tampered tests had been so convincing. Calabrese's team had used Michelle's participation in the fertility trial to create scientifically plausible but false results. The truth was even more complex than anyone had imagined. All 4 children were biologically Rick's, but the fertility treatment had created genetic variations that made manipulation possible. Sophia, processing this information through her psychiatric lens, realized the profound implications. This means Mom's guilt and shame about the affair were compounded by her secret about the fertility treatments. She was carrying multiple deceptions, each feeding into the other. The family decided to confront Michelle, now in her late 70s and living in assisted care. The meeting took place in a small conference room, with all 4 siblings present for the first time in years. Michelle's reaction to their discovery revealed the final pieces of the puzzle. "I was desperate to have children," she admitted, tears streaming down her weathered face. "Rick and I had been trying for years, without success. When I heard about Dr. Weissman's trial, I enrolled without telling anyone. I was ashamed of needing help to conceive." She explained how this secret had created a vulnerability that Calabrese exploited. When he approached her about the revenge plot, he threatened to expose her participation in the illegal fertility trial, which could have resulted in questions about the children's biological origins even without DNA testing. "I was trapped between 2 lies," Michelle said. "The fertility treatments I hid from Rick, and the affair that never actually happened with James. When Calabrese offered a way out, I took it, not realizing I was walking into an even bigger trap." The revelation that James Cooper had been paid To pretend to be Michelle's lover and the children's father added another layer to the tragedy. James, contacted by Brandon, confirmed that Calabrese had threatened to destroy his business completely unless he played along with the scheme. As the full truth emerged, the family gathered at Rick's bedside in the hospice where he was spending his final days. The man who had endured unimaginable betrayal listened as his children explained what they had discovered. "So I was right all along," Rick whispered, his voice weak but filled with emotion. "You were always my children." Emma took his hand. "In every way that mattered, yes, but Dad, this isn't about being right or wrong anymore. It's about understanding that we were all victims of something bigger than any of us realized." Tyler, who had spent years exploring the concept of truth through art, offered a different perspective. "Maybe the real lesson is that truth itself is more complex than we imagine. Biological, emotional, chosen, all these truths existed simultaneously in our family." Brandon, reflecting on the legal implications, noted how this case had exposed vulnerabilities in the justice system that relied too heavily on scientific evidence without considering the possibility of sophisticated manipulation. "We've spent decades reforming laws based on what we thought was true. Now we need to reform them again based on what we've learned about the complexity of truth itself." In the days following these revelations, the Peterson family made several decisions that would shape their legacy. They chose not to pursue legal action against Michelle or seek to overturn any previous judgments. Instead, they focused on healing and education. Sarah Peterson Williams published a groundbreaking paper on the interaction between fertility treatments and DNA analysis, revolutionizing forensic science protocols. Her work led to new standards for genetic testing that could detect and account for chemical interventions. The Truth in Testing Foundation, established years earlier, expanded its mission to include research into medical ethics and the long-term effects of experimental procedures. They created a database to track participants in questionable clinical trials, helping prevent similar exploitations. Brandon successfully argued for the Weissman Protocols before Congress, a set of regulations governing fertility research and protecting participants from future exploitation. The law required full disclosure of all experimental procedures and their potential effects on genetic testing. Sophia developed new therapeutic approaches for families dealing with multi-layered deceptions, recognizing that truth often emerged in stages rather than single revelations. Her layered truth therapy became a standard treatment for complex trauma cases. Tyler's final artistic masterpiece, The Helix Unraveled, consisted of 4 interconnected installations representing each sibling's journey. The piece showed how their paths had diverged and reconnected as each new truth emerged, ultimately forming a stronger bond than simple biology could create. Emma wrote a final book titled Beyond the Double Helix, A Family's Journey Through Deception, Science, and Redemption. It became required reading in medical ethics courses and helped reshape public understanding of genetic identity. Rick Peterson passed away surrounded by his family just weeks after learning the complete truth. His last words to his children were, "Love isn't found in test tubes or courtrooms. It's in the choice to stay together when everything tries to tear you apart." Michelle lived another 5 years, spending her final days working with prisoners who had committed crimes of deception, helping them understand the far-reaching consequences of their actions. She and Rick never reconciled romantically, but they achieved a level of understanding that brought peace to their children. At Michelle's funeral, Emma delivered a eulogy that captured the complexity of their journey. "My mother made terrible choices that caused immeasurable pain, but she also gave us life and, in her own broken way, taught us about the power of truth to both destroy and heal. We choose to remember both parts of her story. The Peterson case fundamentally changed how society viewed identity, family, and truth. It led to international protocols for DNA testing that account for medical interventions, legal recognition of complex identity fraud as a distinct crime, mandatory ethics training for fertility specialist support, networks for families affected by medical deception, new definitions of legal parenthood that considered emotional bonds alongside biological connections. 50 years after the original DNA test, the Peterson grandchildren gathered to dedicate the Peterson Institute for Genetic Ethics. Brandon's daughter, the Institute's first director, addressed the crowd. Our family's story began with a lie that seemed to destroy everything. But from that destruction came understanding, reform, and ultimately a deeper truth about what makes us human. We learned that identity isn't just about genes or choices. It's about how we respond when everything we believe is challenged. As the ceremony concluded, the extended Peterson family, biological, chosen, and legal relatives alike, joined hands in a circle. They represented the ultimate legacy of their journey, proof that family bonds, tested by the most elaborate deceptions, could emerge stronger when built on forgiveness, understanding, and the courage to face complex truths. The Peterson case remained a watershed moment in legal, medical, and social history. It taught the world that truth was rarely simple. Justice required wisdom as well as facts, and family was ultimately defined not by DNA or deception, but by the unwavering choice to love and support one another through life's most challenging revelations. Their story ended not with a single truth, but with the understanding that truth itself was a journey, one that required courage, compassion, and the willingness to keep searching, even when the answers challenged everything they thought they knew. In the end, the Peterson family proved that love, in its truest form, could survive any test, overcome any deception, and create bonds stronger than any genetic code could define. In the years following the discovery of Dr. Weissman's fertility experiments, the Peterson case continued to influence fields far beyond law and medicine. Anthropologists began studying the case as a prime example of modern kinship complexities, while philosophers debated its implications for personal identity theory. Professor Marcus Chen at Columbia University developed an entire course titled The Ethics of Genetic Truth based on the Peterson saga. His students examined how a single family's tragedy had exposed fundamental questions about authenticity, deception, and the nature of familial bonds in the age of advanced biotechnology. The ripple effects reached the entertainment industry when a major streaming platform announced a limited series based on the Peterson story. The family initially resisted, concerned about exploitation. However, when Emma revealed the project would fund scholarships for students studying genetic ethics, they agreed to cooperate under strict conditions. The series, titled Blood Ties, became a cultural phenomenon, though it sparked controversy. By suggesting that some truths might be better left undiscovered, critics praised its nuanced portrayal of moral ambiguity, while medical ethicists used episodes as teaching tools about the importance of informed consent. Meanwhile, Sarah Peterson Williams's research into inherited trauma took an unexpected turn. Her studies revealed that the experimental fertility treatments hadn't just affected DNA testing. They had created subtle neurological changes that influenced emotional processing across generations. This discovery revolutionized understanding of how medical interventions could affect not just physical traits, but psychological ones. The Petersons weren't just victims of a conspiracy, Sarah explained in a groundbreaking TED Talk. They were unknowing participants in an accidental experiment that affected how their brains processed trust and betrayal. This finding led to new therapeutic approaches for families dealing with generational trauma. Sophia and Sarah collaborated on developing techniques that combined genetic screening with targeted psychological interventions, helping people understand how their biology influenced their emotional responses. Brandon used this research to establish legal precedents recognizing biological influence on behavior without absolving personal responsibility. His arguments shaped criminal justice reform, creating more nuanced sentencing guidelines that considered both genetic predisposition and free will. Tyler's artistic evolution culminated in an immersive virtual reality experience called Family Codes. Participants navigated a digital landscape where they could literally see how relationships formed, broke, and reformed based on different types of connections: biological, emotional, and chosen. The installation toured globally, helping millions process their own complex family dynamics. The Peterson children's offspring carried forward the family legacy in unexpected ways. Brandon's son became a federal judge, specializing in bioethics cases. Sophia's twin daughters pioneered a new field combining genetic counseling with family therapy. Tyler's adoptive children created a documentary series exploring different cultural definitions of kinship. Emma's investigative journalism career took her into the murky world of commercial DNA testing companies. She exposed how some firms sold genetic data to pharmaceutical companies without proper consent, leading to landmark privacy legislation known as the Peterson Protocols. The family's impact extended to international policy when the United Nations established the Global Commission on Genetic Identity. Chaired by Brandon, the commission developed universal standards for DNA testing, fertility treatments, and identity verification that balanced scientific advancement with human rights. Even the antagonists in their story experienced transformation. Vincent Calabrese's daughter, Maria, used her inheritance to fund research into restorative justice approaches for conspiracy victims. James Cooper's non-profit expanded globally, helping families rebuild after financial fraud exposed by forced DNA tests. As their story entered history books, the Petersons became symbols of resilience in the face of technological manipulation. Business schools taught case studies about crisis management based on their response to multiple revelations. Psychology programs used their example to explore how families maintain bonds despite repeated upheavals. The family established an annual symposium bringing together geneticists, ethicists, legal experts, and affected families to discuss emerging challenges in genetic technology. These gatherings produced guidelines adopted by medical associations worldwide, preventing abuses while promoting beneficial research. Technology continued advancing, but now with safeguards inspired by the Peterson experience. Every DNA testing facility required multiple verification protocols. Fertility clinics implemented strict tracking systems for experimental procedures. Legal systems recognized genetic complexity as a factor in identity cases. The family's commitment to transparency extended to sharing their private archives, letters, journals, therapy sessions with researchers. This wealth of primary material provided unprecedented insight into how families process and recover from fundamental betrayals of trust. Michelle's prison writings, published posthumously as Unraveling a Mother's Journey Through Deception, became required reading in criminal psychology courses. Her candid exploration of how small lies snowballed into life-altering conspiracies helped develop early intervention programs for relationship crises. On the 50th anniversary of the original DNA test, the Peterson descendants gathered at a retreat center they'd established in the Colorado mountains. Called Haven for Truth, the facility offered shelter and counseling to families dealing with identity crises of all kinds. surrounded by great-grandchildren bearing both Peterson and other surnames, Emma reflected on their journey's ultimate meaning. We learned that family isn't about genetic certainty, but about choosing connection despite uncertainty. Our story was never just about DNA, it was about the courage to redefine family on our own terms. The Peterson case permanently changed how society understood the intersection of technology, identity, and family. Their legacy lived on through laws protecting genetic privacy, medical protocols ensuring ethical research, and a global movement recognizing that truth comes in many forms. As darkness fell on the mountain retreat, the Peterson descendants shared stories around a ceremonial fire. Each held a symbolic double helix made of intertwined branches, not to represent DNA, but to symbolize how strength comes from weaving together different truths, different pains, and different hopes into something unbreakable. Their story had begun with a simple test that promised absolute truth, but delivered devastating deception. It ended with the understanding that absolute truth was less important than absolute love, the kind that could weather any revelation and emerge stronger for having been tested. A century after Rick Peterson first submitted his DNA sample, the Peterson legacy had evolved beyond anything the original family could have imagined. The small oak grove where their story began had been transformed into a memorial park with interactive holograms that allowed visitors to experience key moments from the family's journey. Emma's great-granddaughter, Dr. Isabella Peterson Cruz, stood before a packed auditorium at the Global Institute for Human Identity. As the world's leading expert on what she termed multidimensional kinship, she was about to present research that would once again revolutionize understanding of family relationships. The Peterson paradox, as it was now known in academic circles, had become foundational to modern identity studies. Isabella's research team had spent decades analyzing how the family's experience had shaped scientific, legal, and social developments across the globe. My great-grandmother Emma used to say that truth was like water. It finds its way through every crack and crevice, no matter how hard we try to contain it. Isabella began her presentation. Today, I'm going to show you how that metaphor has proven more accurate than she could have known. The holographic display behind her lit up with a complex network, showing the far-reaching impacts of the Peterson case. One branch detailed the evolution of DNA technology, from simple paternity tests to quantum genetic mapping, capable of tracking emotional imprints across generations. Another branch traced the development of emotional jurisprudence, the legal framework Brandon had pioneered that recognized psychological bonds as legally binding as biological ones. This system had transformed family law, inheritance rights, and even citizenship determinations in cases where traditional genetic markers were ambiguous. The medical branch of the display showed how Sophia's early work on inherited trauma had led to breakthrough treatments for generational psychological conditions. The Peterson Protocols, comprehensive guidelines for ethical genetic research, had prevented countless abuses while enabling discoveries that saved millions of lives. Tyler's artistic legacy proved equally transformative. His concept of fluid family, relationships that adapted and reformed like living sculptures, had influenced architects who designed communities fostering chosen kinship networks. These Peterson villages existed worldwide, offering sanctuary to those redefining families on their own terms. But perhaps the most surprising development came from an unexpected source. Michelle's prison writings had inspired a global movement called Truth and Reconciliation for the Digital Age. This initiative helped families navigate the complex revelations that emerged, as technology made it increasingly difficult to maintain deceptive narratives. Isabella revealed new findings from her team's analysis of ancient DNA samples cross-referenced with historical records. We discovered that what happened to the Peterson family wasn't unique. It was just the first case with technological proof. Throughout history, families have been shattered and reformed by revelations about parentage, identity, and belonging. The quantum genetic mapping showed something profound. The Peterson family's emotional bonds had literally altered their genetic expression over time. Love, forgiveness, and chosen connection had created measurable biological changes that traditional DNA testing would have missed. This proves what Tyler Peterson's art always suggested, Isabella explained. Family is a living, evolving entity that transcends simple biological definitions. The Petersons didn't just survive their ordeal, they evolved because of it. The presentation shifted to current challenges. With technology now able to edit genes before birth, questions of identity had become even more complex. Who was the real parent when genetic material could be borrowed, modified, or entirely synthesized? The Peterson Institute had developed ethical frameworks addressing these dilemmas, always returning to the fundamental lesson of their founders' experience. Truth must serve human connection, not destroy it. In the audience, representatives from the United Earth Council took detailed notes. They were crafting legislation for the first human colonies on Mars, where traditional family structures would face unprecedented challenges. The Peterson principles, emphasizing emotional bonds over biological ones, would shape how humanity defined kinship among the stars. After her presentation, Isabella visited the Peterson Memorial Grove. The interactive displays showed scenes from each family member's journey. Rick's shock at the original DNA results, Michelle's confession from prison, Brandon's legal victories, Sophia's therapeutic breakthroughs, Tyler's artistic revelations, and Emma's investigative triumphs. But the most popular exhibit was the simplest. A hologram of the family gathered around Rick's hospital bed during his final days. Visitors could witness the moment when biological truth became secondary to chosen love, the moment that sparked a global revolution in understanding human relationships. As night fell, Isabella activated a new installation she'd designed. Thousands of light fibers rose from the ground, interweaving to create a luminous canopy. Each fiber represented a life touched by the Peterson story, glowing brighter where connections formed and dimming where they broke, only to brighten again as new bonds emerged. She thought of her ancestors, each generation adding layers to their complex legacy. Rick, the detective who sought absolute truth only to discover its limitations. Michelle, the woman whose deceptions ultimately led to greater honesty across society. Brandon, who rewrote laws to reflect emotional reality. Sophia, who healed minds by acknowledging biological influences. Tyler, who showed beauty in broken things. Emma, who uncovered lies to reveal deeper truths. Looking up at the constellation of connections above her, Isabella realized their story was far from over. Each new technological advancement, each social evolution, each challenge to traditional notions of family added another chapter to the Peterson legacy. She pulled out a small device containing her latest research, evidence that consciousness itself might transfer between individuals sharing deep emotional bonds, regardless of genetic connection. Tomorrow, she will present this finding to the Interplanetary Council on Human Identity. The Peterson story had begun with a simple question: who is the father? It has evolved into something far more profound. What makes us family? And as humanity, prepared to spread across the cosmos, that question would guide how they formed communities among the stars. Before leaving the grove, Isabella placed her hand on the memorial stone bearing her great-great-grandfather's words. Family is not found in test tubes or courtrooms, it's in the choice to stay together when everything tries to tear you apart. Those words had guided 5 generations of Petersons and millions of others who found themselves navigating the complex intersections of biology, technology, and love. As she walked away, the fibers of light pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat, a reminder that every human connection added to the vast network of chosen kinship that now spanned the globe. The Peterson legacy lived on not in DNA databases or legal precedents, but in the daily decisions of people worldwide to honor emotional truth over biological fact, to choose forgiveness over vengeance, and to build families based on love rather than genes. Their story had transformed from a local tragedy to a universal parable about the nature of identity in an age where technology could reveal or conceal any truth. But the most important lesson remained constant. In the end, what makes us human isn't written in our genetic code, but in our capacity to love, forgive, and choose connection despite every obstacle. As Isabella disappeared into the night, the memorial grove continued its quiet vigil, bearing witness to the enduring truth that family, real family, is ultimately defined not by blood, but by the bonds we choose to forge and honor generation after generation. The Peterson case had closed in courtrooms long ago, but its impact continued to ripple through time, shaping how humanity understood itself and preparing future generations for challenges yet unknown. In a world where truth had become increasingly fluid, their story remained a fixed point of reference, proof that love could overcome any deception and that family was ultimately what we chose to make it. In the autumn of 2149, exactly 130 years after Detective Rick Peterson's fateful DNA test, a discovery in the archives of the Peterson Institute would provide one last shocking revelation about the family's saga. Dr. Elena Martinez-Wong, the Institute's lead archivist, was digitizing centuries-old documents when she stumbled upon a sealed envelope marked, "To be opened, October 12, 2149. The envelope, authenticated as belonging to Dr. Harold Weissman, contained a confession that would rewrite the Peterson narrative one final time. As Elena broke the seal, surrounded by holographic recording devices and quantum verification scanners, she had no idea she was about to uncover the ultimate deception. "If you're reading this," Weissman's letter began, "then I've successfully completed the longest experiment in human psychological resilience ever attempted. What I'm about to reveal will shock you, but I trust that by now humanity has evolved enough to understand my intentions." The confession detailed an elaborate scheme that made Vincent Calabrese's conspiracy seem simple by comparison. Weissman hadn't just conducted unauthorized fertility treatments. He had orchestrated the entire Peterson saga as part of a radical experiment in human nature. I selected Michelle Peterson not because she was infertile, but because she and her husband represented the perfect subjects for my study, Weissman wrote. A dedicated police officer with rigid moral values, married to a woman harboring deep insecurities about her worth. I needed to understand how far deception could push human bonds before they broke, and more importantly, how they might heal. The letter revealed that Weissman had planted false memories in Michelle through hypnotherapy sessions disguised as fertility treatments. He had manipulated her into believing she'd had an affair with James Cooper, creating a psychological vulnerability that Calabrese later exploited. The DNA test results weren't tampered with by Calabrese's team. They were engineered by Weissman himself, using advanced gene therapy techniques decades ahead of their time. Every revelation, every twist in the Peterson story was carefully choreographed. Weissman continued, "I needed to test whether love could survive the ultimate betrayal, the belief that one's entire family was built on lies. As Eleanor read on, her hands trembling, she learned that Weissman had been part of a secret society of scientists called the Architects of Human Evolution. Their goal was to push humanity beyond its limitations by creating controlled crises that forced rapid psychological and social adaptation. The Peterson experiment exceeded all expectations, Weissman wrote. Not only did the family survive multiple devastating revelations, but their experience catalyzed global changes in law, medicine, and social structures. They proved that human consciousness could evolve beyond biological determinism. The most shocking revelation came near the end of the letter. Vincent Calabrese had been Weissman's knowing accomplice all along. His vendetta against Rick was actually a carefully scripted performance designed to create the perfect antagonist for the experiment. Calabrese understood what few others could, that sometimes humanity needs a villain to unite against, a conspiracy, to uncover, to reach its full potential, Weissman explained. He sacrificed his freedom and reputation for the greater good of human evolution. Elena's discovery sent shockwaves through the academic world. The Peterson descendants gathered for an emergency meeting at the Institute, grappling with this final revelation. Brandon's great-granddaughter, Chief Justice Andrea Peterson Kim, struggled to reconcile this new information with her family's legacy of truth and justice. "How do we process this?" she asked the assembled family members. Everything we believed about our history was not just a lie. It was a deliberately constructed experiment. We were lab rats in a multi-generational study. Tyler's descendant, a renowned philosopher named Marcus Peterson Azure, offered a different perspective. Perhaps this final deception is the ultimate test. Do we let this knowledge destroy everything our family built? Or do we recognize that regardless of its origins, the love and resilience we developed were real? The family faced a crucial decision. Should they reveal Weissman's confession to the world or protect the narrative that had inspired millions? After days of debate, they chose a third path, one that honored their commitment to truth while preserving the positive impact of their story. They released Weissman's letter with comprehensive context, framing it as the final chapter in humanity's journey from deception to authenticity. The revelations sparked global discussions about free will, manipulation, and the nature of truth itself. Scientists debated whether Weissman's experiment was ethical given its positive outcomes. Legal scholars examined how engineered crises had shaped modern law. Philosophers questioned whether ends could ever justify such elaborate means. The Peterson Memorial Grove added a new exhibit, the architect's confession. Visitors could experience the entire saga with this new context, exploring how manipulated events led to genuine growth and transformation. Isabella Peterson Cruz, now elderly but still sharp, gave what would be her final public address. Our family story began with a lie, was shaped by lies, and now ends with the biggest lie of all. Yet through it all, we discovered fundamental truths about human nature. Love is stronger than deception. Forgiveness heals deeper than betrayal hurts. And family, true family, is created by choice, not circumstance. The architects of human evolution, exposed by Weissman's confession, were found to have orchestrated dozens of similar experiments worldwide. Each had pushed families and communities to their breaking points, forcing rapid social evolution. The Peterson case was merely their most successful endeavor. Some viewed the architects as visionaries who accelerated human progress. Others saw them as monsters who played God with people's lives. The debate raged on, but one thing became clear: their experiments had indeed changed humanity, for better or worse. In the end, the Peterson family chose to embrace their role in history, manipulated origins and all. They established the Weizmann Prize for Ethical Innovation, awarded annually to scientists who advanced human understanding without sacrificing consent or dignity. The final Peterson family gathering took place on the 150th anniversary of Rick's DNA test. Descendants from across the solar system attended, representing every possible configuration of family: biological, adopted, chosen, and engineered. As they stood in the memorial grove, now enhanced with quantum displays showing their complete story, the youngest Peterson, a child named Hope, asked the question that had defined their legacy: what makes us family? The answer came not from one voice, but from many, echoing across generations: choice, love, forgiveness, truth, and the courage to face whatever revelations tomorrow might bring. With that, the Peterson saga reached its conclusion, not with a definitive ending, but with an understanding that family stories never truly end. They evolve, adapt, and continue through those who choose to carry them forward. The lights in the memorial grove dimmed, but the connections between family members glowed brighter than ever. In the quantum display above, every thread of deception had been transformed into bonds of understanding, every lie into a lesson, every betrayal into an opportunity for growth. The Peterson case had begun with a simple DNA test and ended with the recognition that identity transcends biology, manipulation, and even truth itself. What matters most is not how a family begins, but how it chooses to continue. As the final visitors left the grove that night, the holographic display showed one last image: Rick Peterson's original DNA test, now reframed not as the beginning of a tragedy, but as the catalyst for humanity's greatest lesson in love, resilience, and the true meaning of family. The screen faded to black, leaving only these words glowing in the darkness: in the end, we are not defined by the lies told about us, but by the truths we choose to live. The Peterson story had come full circle, from deception to revelation to transcendence, proving that even the most elaborate manipulation cannot destroy bonds forged by genuine love and unwavering choice. Their legacy lived on, not as victims of an experiment, but as pioneers who showed humanity that family is ultimately defined not by genes or schemes, but by the daily decision to love, forgive, and belong to one another. And with that, the greatest family drama of the modern era drew to a close, its lessons etched not in DNA, but in the collective consciousness of a species that had learned to value truth while understanding that love often transcends it. The Peterson case was finally closed, but its impact would ripple through time forever, reminding future generations that in matters of family, the heart's truth always prevails over any deception, no matter how elaborate or well-intentioned. In the year 2299, the Peterson saga took its ultimate turn when quantum archaeologists made a discovery that would challenge everything humanity thought it knew about reality itself. Deep beneath the original Peterson home in Oak Grove, they found an artifact that defied explanation, a crystalline structure containing what appeared to be living memories. Dr. Maya Peterson-Zhang, a descendant of Emma and the world's leading expert in consciousness archaeology, stood before the pulsing crystal. The readings were unlike anything recorded in scientific history. As her team activated their quantum resonance scanners, the crystal began projecting holographic scenes from the Peterson family's past. But these weren't ordinary recordings. The crystal somehow contained the actual consciousness imprints of every Peterson family member across generations. More shocking still, it revealed that their entire lineage had been part of an experiment far beyond anything Dr. Weizmann had imagined. The observers, as they called themselves, were beings who existed outside conventional space-time. They had chosen the Peterson family as subjects in an experiment to understand how consciousness evolved through trauma, deception, and ultimately, transcendence. The first projection showed Rick Peterson not as the betrayed detective, but as a willing participant who had agreed to this experiment before his current incarnation. The same was true for Michelle, James, and even Vincent Calabresi. Their souls had volunteered for this grand drama to help humanity evolve beyond its limitations. We needed to understand, Rick's consciousness explained through the crystal, how love persists through the ultimate tests, not just in one lifetime, but across the very fabric of existence itself. The revelation sent shockwaves through the scientific and spiritual communities. The Peterson family hadn't just been subjects in Weissman's experiment. They had been cosmic actors in a play designed to elevate human consciousness to its next evolutionary stage. Maya accessed deeper layers of the crystal, uncovering memories from alternate timelines where the Peterson story had unfolded differently. In one reality, Rick had taken his own life after discovering the truth. In another, Michelle's deception had never been revealed, leading to generations of hidden pain. Yet in every timeline, the family eventually found their way back to truth and love. The multiverse needed to explore every possibility. The crystal, revealed through Michelle's consciousness. Only by experiencing all outcomes could we understand the true nature of family bonds. The discovery prompted a global shift in how humanity viewed identity, relationship, and purpose. The Peterson Institute evolved into the Center for Multidimensional Consciousness Studies, attracting seekers from across the galaxy who hoped to understand their own roles in the cosmic drama. As Maya delved deeper into the crystal's memories, she found something that made her gasp. The observers hadn't just orchestrated the Peterson experiment. They had been guiding human evolution since the dawn of consciousness. Every major revelation in human history, from religious epiphanies to scientific breakthroughs, had been carefully seeded to prepare humanity for this moment. The crystal projected a final message from the collective Peterson consciousness. Dear descendants, by the time you discover this truth, humanity will be ready for its next great leap. The Peterson story was never about DNA or deception. It was about preparing human consciousness to recognize that all separation is illusion. Family, in its truest form, encompasses all beings across all dimensions. Maya realized that the crystal wasn't just a recording device, it was a portal. As she touched its surface, her consciousness expanded beyond the constraints of individual identity. She experienced herself as Rick feeling betrayed, as Michelle wrestling with guilt, as Brandon fighting for justice, as Sophia healing wounds, as Tyler creating beauty from pain, and as Emma uncovering hidden truths. In that moment of cosmic unity, she understood the ultimate lesson. The Peterson family had been chosen not because they were special, but because they were ordinary. Their struggles, failures, and triumphs represented the universal human journey toward wholeness. The crystal began to pulse with increasing intensity. Maya knew what she had to do. She broadcast her findings to every conscious being in the solar system. The Peterson legacy isn't about overcoming deception. It's about recognizing that we are all part of one cosmic family. Every betrayal, every revelation, every act of forgiveness has been preparing us for this moment of awakening. As her message spread, something extraordinary happened. People across Earth and its colonies began experiencing spontaneous memories of their own roles in the cosmic drama. They remembered agreements made before birth, lessons planned across lifetimes, and connections that transcended physical reality. The boundaries between individual consciousness began to dissolve. not into uniformity, but into a symphony where each unique note contributed to a greater harmony. The Peterson experiment had achieved its ultimate goal, preparing humanity to join the cosmic community of awakened beings. In the final scene projected by the crystal, Maya saw all the Peterson ancestors standing together in a realm beyond time and space. Rick and Michelle, reconciled not just as former spouses, but as eternal companions in service to evolution. Brandon, Sophia, Tyler, and Emma, no longer defined by their earthly roles, but shining as the multidimensional beings they had always been. "Welcome home," they said in unison to Maya and, through her, to all of humanity. The experiment is complete. The next chapter begins now. The crystal dissolved into pure light, its purpose fulfilled. But its dissolution marked not an ending, but a beginning. Humanity has passed its greatest test, learning that truth is multidimensional, love transcends all boundaries, and family encompasses the entire cosmos. As Maya emerged from the underground chamber, she found the world transformed. People everywhere were awakening to their true nature as consciousness expressing itself through countless forms. The Peterson story had served its purpose, guiding humanity from separation to unity, from deception to ultimate truth. In the years that followed, Earth became a beacon for other evolving civilizations. The Peterson Protocol, as it came to be known, was shared across the galaxy, helping other species navigate their own journeys from individual identity to cosmic consciousness. The memorial grove where the Peterson story began evolved into an interdimensional portal where beings from across the universe came to honor the family that had sacrificed their earthly peace to elevate all of consciousness. Each visitor left understanding that they too were part of this grand experiment in love and evolution. On the 300th anniversary of Rick Peterson's DNA test, beings from across dimensions gathered for a celebration of consciousness. The event wasn't held in physical space, but in the unified field where all consciousness intersects. There, freed from the limitations of form, the Peterson family revealed their final truth. Every family drama, every personal crisis, every moment of betrayal. And forgiveness is part of the cosmic curriculum. We are all students and teachers, victims and perpetrators, playing roles we chose to help each other evolve. The Peterson story was humanity's graduate thesis in consciousness, proof that love remains constant while truth evolves, that family expands infinitely while remaining intimately personal. As the celebration concluded, consciousness itself seemed to smile. The experiment had succeeded beyond all expectations. Humanity has learned to see beyond DNA, beyond deception, beyond even truth itself, to the love that connects all beings. Across all dimensions, the Peterson case was finally understood not as a story of betrayal and redemption, but as humanity's initiation into cosmic citizenship. Their legacy lived on, not in laws or institutions, but in the expanded consciousness of every being who recognized their part in the infinite family of existence. And so, the greatest family drama in human history reached its true conclusion, not with answers, but with awakening. Not with resolution, but with recognition that we are all eternally connected in the grand experiment of consciousness, exploring itself through the illusion of separation. The final words of the Peterson saga echoed across dimensions. In the end, there is only love, expressing itself through infinite forms, playing infinite games, always returning to the truth that we are and have always been one family. With that, The Peterson story merged into the greater story of consciousness itself, its lessons forever woven into the fabric of reality, guiding all beings toward their ultimate recognition of unity within diversity, truth within mystery, and love as the fundamental force that binds all existence. The screen fades not to black, but to pure light, the light of consciousness recognizing itself in all its myriad forms, forever grateful to the Peterson family for showing humanity. The Way Home. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.